Go. Hi, folks. Sorry about the late start tonight. I thought I would try doing a little experiment and host this week's Good Natured Hour from the porch out here in front of Good Natured World Headquarters. But our town is too noisy. I thought, this pitter patter of a gentle rain that's hopefully soaking in would set a nice, theme for tonight's program. And the gentle rain wasn't the problem. It was the truck that went by and the motorcycle that was probably regretting its decision to be out on a rainy night, and other noises like that. So anyway, I'm upstairs now. I'm kind of dried off, and we've got lots to share tonight. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's see, let's start this from the beginning. Yep, no. So if you happen to catch last week's column, or even if you didn't, we're going to do a little recap on what all the drama that's going on right now. We're seeing a lot of birds that are migrating through, and of course migration is fraught with peril. That's a whole other topic for another time. But there's a lot of birds that have already arrived, or maybe they never left their breeding territory, and they've set about the business of building their nests and laying their eggs and raising their young. And I tell you, it is not easy. Now, what you're looking at here is probably some of our more notorious players in this bird eat bird drama. This is the brown-headed cowbird. They're what are known as brood parasites or nest parasite. What they do is they lay their eggs in other birds' nests. And the prevailing thought on brown-headed cowbirds is that they developed, the species kind of developed around the plains area in prairies and places where there were bison. And these birds would follow the bison and feed on the insects that the bison kicked up. And having a somewhat nomadic approach to life, they weren't really able to afford to spend several weeks in one spot raising their own broods. So they found it a lot easier to just put their eggs in the nests of birds that were actually going to be sticking around. I kind of get that, and that makes a lot of sense, but I do also wonder if there's more to the story we just haven't figured out yet, because if the bison is roaming and the cowbirds are following it, that would imply that, well, they're not staying in one spot for very long. Yet we have repeatedly now, there's been studies that have come out that have said that these birds do stick around to see how their eggs fare in the nests of other birds. And I don't know, it could be they don't stick around. They're not there as long as it would take to raise them to fledging, perhaps, but they do exert an almost, in fact, they've called it a mafia-like behavior. Some of the researchers have said that they have a retaliation for birds that opt to oust the cowbird egg or the cowbird nestling from the nest, and they'll go back and they will puncture or destroy the eggs of the nest that they had chosen to lay their eggs in. So there is a little, it's not really hands-on or what would you say, feet on, beak on parental care as we see with some of our other most of our other species, but they do stick around and they will retaliate if the host bird opts to not raise those cowbird chicks. So that was one bird that kind of prompted the idea for this article, but then there were other ideas that were running through my head. One was how people, when they find an egg on the ground, their first thought is to try and save it and to incubate it. And sometimes that's just not possible. That egg might have not been destined to develop fully anyway. And there's just a lot of things that birds even do within their own species that can make the survival of those eggs impossible. Before we go to the next slide, though, I wanted to show you this. I first saw some cowbird fledglings. This was several years ago. Someone had sent me this picture, and we don't often see the birds or have photos taken of the birds in this stage, but this is a cowbird, a brown-headed cowbird fledgling. And they look just all kind of crazy, blotchy, splotchy. You don't see birds often with that kind of pattern to them, and they kind of will make you do a double take. But you know, as we progress through the breeding season, it could be that you'll see some of these birds in your yard and be wondering about them. If you see a crazy brown bird with black splotches all over it, you're looking at a successfully fledged brown-headed cowbird. Now, I also, as I was mulling over this topic, I went and I got some emails out from Mike Swanson, who you might recognize that name if you've spent any time out at Hickory Knolls looking at our Bluebird Trail or our Purple Martin houses. Mike has volunteered for the Park District for over 20 years. And he not only maintains a Purple Martin colony, but he also maintains a Bluebird Trail where there's bluebird houses both in the community garden plots next to the nature center, as well as in the inner loop trail that's in the Hickory Knolls natural area. And Mike has fought, got an ongoing battle with these two birds, one of which is introduced and the other which is native. He had one time explained to me some of the things that he was having to deal with to maintain a successful hatching and fledging rate from those boxes. He said that sometimes a wren will puncture each egg and just leave it in the nest. Sometimes the hole is used to insert half of the wren's beak to assure a good grip for removing the egg from the nest. So they will poke a hole, and sometimes they actually get to the point of ousting it. Sometimes they just poke a hole and leave it. House sparrows, on the other hand, will crush the eggs so that the contents drain into the nest and only pieces of eggshells remain on the surface. So if you do have some bluebird houses in your yard and something happens to them, this is some of Mike's forensic experience coming in. If you want to try and figure out what, you know, if there was a little drama that happened inside that house, this information can help you figure out who it was who was responsible. He also told this story that he trapped a female house sparrow in a box that was adjacent to another box that had tree swallows nesting in it. He said he was unable to trap the male for that pair of sparrows. That male sparrow took out his frustration for losing his mate by destroying the swallow eggs that were in the adjacent box. And those swallows then opted to abandon that box. Then he said that sparrows will also kill chicks in a nest box near where his sparrow trap is. And if there are no other nests nearby, a male sparrow will start singing to attract another female to that same box that he and his mate had been using, since he was loyal to the location, not the mate. Contrary to that, if a male bluebird loses a mate, the nest box will be abandoned and he'll look for a new nest site before singing to attract a new mate, since he was loyal to the mate, not the location. So I thought that was interesting too. Again, Mike has been doing this for over 2 decades, and his notes are really comprehensive, and his observation skills are excellent as well. And he's always shared these sort of observations with us. So, you know, we all love the idea of putting a box out and seeing birds fledge, but there's a lot of things going on that these birds have to contend with. In fact, I even was witness to some drama in my own backyard recently. I've had a pair of northern cardinals nesting in these bushes. This is my backyard. I know it looks kind of tangly, but that's all my beloved elderberries. And I've made a tonic from the flowers. I think we drank that during a program last year, or I drank it anyway, during a program last year, the elderflower brew. And then I've made another tincture from the berries, which you basically just cover them in vodka and let them steep for a few, well, about 6 months is good. And then you can sip that. It's got some wonderful healthful qualities to it. But it also attracts a lot of birds who like this shrubby sort of growth. They usually get a catbird in there every year. And again, we had cardinals this year. Well, I was sitting out on my deck and this is what I heard. That tipping or chipping sound there. Those are two very excited and probably a little distraught cardinals. They have actually successfully raised their brood to the point of fledging. And those little baby cardinals are on the ground. I somewhat thoughtlessly let my dogs out when I heard the cardinals. And it took me a minute to realize, well, that's tech support puppy down there, that's Boker. And he himself was posing a little bit of threat and a little bit of drama to those fledgling cardinals that are in the bushes behind him there. So once I figured out what was going on, I pulled him inside and we worked inside for the rest of the day. But even once a bird leaves the nest, there can be all kinds of dangers around it, especially here in suburbia. Now that actually kind of pales to some of the drama that's going in some larger nests. There's an article I believe it was in the Atlantic, but if anybody's interested in reading it, I could forward it to you. But it talked about egrets, and this isn't a behavior specific to egrets. Herons do it. In fact, even great horned owls, but birds that have nestlings, birds that have offspring that hatch sequentially as opposed to all at once, where there's several sometimes days of age difference between the birds in the nest. They'll actually allow siblicide to occur, where the larger nestmates will attack and sometimes kill the smallest of their nestmates. There's a few different ways of looking at that behavior. For the survival of the species, the parents are laying that say third or fourth egg to give them some insurance. If something should happen to the nest and the first or second birds that hatch, they've still got that spare egg there. They can sometimes have enough resources to successfully fledge all of those, but if they don't, it's just kind of the cost that they have of raising young every year. They don't always count on all of them making it. In fact, this picture on the right, this shows, now this was not a local picture. This was down in Florida, but studies have shown that egrets that nest, they might have a rookery right above a popular alligator hangout. There's actually a higher success rate for those nests in areas like that, even though there's a large predator like that, because they'll help keep animals like raccoons and other nest predators away from the area. The egrets will sometimes even sacrifice a chick or two to the alligators as sort of a payment for that protection. We've seen that behavior. We talked about it a few weeks ago with the relationship between great blue herons and bald eagles. So again, they can lay an egg, they can hatch the egg, but getting that hatchling to successfully fledge is not ever a given. And it's a fascinating study. It's a fascinating part of the life cycle of our birds. And again, I know we like to think that everybody's going to make it out of the nest successfully, but it doesn't always happen that way. just something to think about, when you're watching nests, and keeping your fingers crossed that everybody makes it out okay. Parents usually aren't counting on that. They'll do their best, but it doesn't always happen. Just a fascinating drama that's playing out right now in our own yards and parks and forest preserves. Now, you know what? Looks like we got some things out of order here. Well, let's just start here with the barn owl. Barns have been a part of the Illinois landscape for, 150 years or more. As settlers came to this area, they brought their farming techniques with them, and that included shelter for their farm animals. And the wildlife in this area was left to either adapt or leave. And one of those birds that was subject to that decision was the barn owl. When you look at a barn, you can look at it from an agricultural perspective, or you can look at it from the perspective of the barn owl. There's cupolas, there's silos, there's haylofts, there's all kinds of wonderful habitat in these structures. Look at these wonderful hand-hewn beams inside that are great for roosting and perching. An owl can look down on the many things that live inside the barn. We've got hay that provides shelter for, I think that's a brown lump there. I think that's a cat, but there's also lots of, as we see here, little birds that might come in for shelter, and certainly lots of rodents. So there's shelter and there's food, two very big attractants for barn owls, and something that caused them to adapt fairly readily to this new appearance on their landscape back in the middle 1800s. Delicious little mousies just waiting to be plucked. Well, in fact, until the 1960s, barn owls were actually considered fairly common in the southern half of the state of Illinois. And that was an important time in Illinois agriculture. Agricultural practices were modernizing very quickly, and practices were changing. Rather than having fields for pastures, a lot of cattle raising practices were changing. There was more concentrated means of raising cattle. The typical family farm, those were going away in favor of more modern and higher production means of raising our crops and our cattle. And as things started to progress like that, the old barns started to go away. And with that, it was a very important habitat component for the barn owl. As the barns dropped from sight and were replaced by more modern structures, when you picture, pictures like, say, a pole barn or a metal building, I've often called them, Morton is a company that produces them, the Morton building. They don't have that habitat that we saw in these older barns, the wooden structures that were maybe had some gaps. There were hay lofts with doors that maybe didn't shut quite so tight. The modern farm buildings don't offer that sort of habitat either. So we lost the hunting grounds outside of the farms. The farms today, they don't have as hospitable hunting grounds because of the sort of property line to property line state of agriculture that we do have. And the barn owl population, as a result, kind of took a nosedive. The birds were found declared endangered in Illinois. And in the early 21st century, the Illinois Endangered Species Board started taking a look at that. And different areas started trying to devise ways of helping this species come back. Now, some of you might remember I would say it was around 2007, 2008, up to maybe 2010, there were some barn owl reintroductions that took place here in northern Illinois, where birds were released. They were reared in captivity and then they were released. And that didn't work so well. The birds took off for, well, some of them took off for points unknown of that study. Yeah, let's get rid of that. In the early part of that reintroduction effort, the birds were equipped with radio transmitters that only had a range of a few miles, and radio transmitters on an animal that flies, if the bird doesn't stay in the immediate area where it was released, it's going to be really hard to find them. Now, radio transmitters, they still work great for things like turtles that aren't going to be taking off for, say, New Jersey or South Dakota, but that's what the barn owls did in that reintroduction effort. So that project didn't really go on for too long before they realized that the birds just weren't going to be staying in the area. So again, the Illinois Endangered Species Board started looking at what other states were doing to bring back barn owls, and what they found was that they in 2010 enacted their recovery program, and they wanted to, by 2015, have at least 40 active nest sites in at least 15 counties. And if they would be able to double that, then they would declare barn owls officially off the endangered species list. So that was some pretty aggressive growth that they had in mind. And what they did was they developed this plan that had 6 elements to it. They wanted to erect and monitor nest boxes within plausible nesting areas. And by plausible, what they did was they looked at areas, they looked at counties that had conservation easement programs and had at least one active barn owl nest. And they started there, and then they kind of gradually expanded. They put out a rule to people who participated in this project that if a young barn owl was found on the ground, to leave it. They had found, other states had found that if humans interfered with a barn owl, a fledgling, and they see this little hopeless owl on the ground, and they immediately take it into a rescue center, that actually had a poor effect on the barn owl's ability to survive more than a year or so in the wild. So they said, don't interfere with them when they're down on the ground. And they also push the grassland conservation, which means, putting taking some croplands out of production and putting them into conservation, instead planting them with native prairie plants to encourage small animal populations, the things that barn owls like to eat. And then that was to be accompanied by a campaign to promote public awareness of barn owls and support for this project. And then all along, trying to learn as much as they could about the species. So here's what the nest box looked like. There's a couple different ones. This is the pole-mounted nest box. And the barn owls kind of size this up, and we're watching maybe from afar or maybe from up close. This barn owl nest box company was involved in producing the boxes that were used in the study. There's also, besides the pole mounted version, this is one that could go on one of those modern barn or shed buildings, these metal structures that maybe lack the old style habitat, but by adding these boxes did give the barn owls an option for nesting. Well, look at these numbers here. So 7 years after this program was active, which is a pretty short time in terms of species, comebacks. By 2017, they counted 70 nests statewide. And just last year, when the Endangered Species Board met, they agreed to take the barn owl off the threatened and endangered list, which I think we'll all agree is cause for celebration. With that, we're going to move on. And I know a couple of you are a little bit squeamish about looking at dead stuff. So I'm just going to warn you, this is the result of an email I got just, gosh, was it yesterday or today? From Chris and Carla. They found a carcass and they sent these photos in wondering what it might be. This was, as you can see, it was in some water. Here's a better look at it. Kind of gives you a scope. The guess, Chris, I believe was it might have been Bambi. But if we look at the fur here, I'm going to go with, rather than an unfortunate young deer, I'm going to go with a large and dead raccoon. And the reason I went with that is because they are by far the #1 dead thing that people find and have questions about. If people bring skulls to Hickory Knolls for identification and they always say, is this a fox? I tell you every single time, it's not a fox, it's a raccoon. We even have a charcoal drawing of a raccoon skull that was donated to the Nature Center it was the winner in an art contest, but it was a skull that somebody had found and drew a picture of. I tell you, raccoon skulls, they just seem to be everywhere. These are a large animal. The average male is 15 to 20 pounds, with that 20 pounds being up here in the northern part of Illinois. The northern raccoons are bigger than the southern raccoons. In fact, some of them are close to 30 pounds, which is 3 10-pound sacks of potatoes. That's a big animal. They can be over a yard long if you throw the tail in. And the IDNR has estimated that the raccoon population is from anywhere from 9 to 45 raccoons per square mile, and that that lower number is in the more rural areas because they are actively hunted. Up here in suburbia, here in Kane County, we can have over 100 raccoons per square mile. So there's a lot of raccoons out here. And they can meet with some pretty dastardly ends. They can get hit by cars. A lot of them have the things that we protect our domestic animals, our cats and our dogs from through vaccines and various medicines. The raccoon is basically a reservoir for those things. They carry distemper, parvovirus, they have roundworm, tapeworm, there's other parasites. And then this, I've just been dying for like the last 15 years. I've wanted a reason to use this picture, and you finally get to see it tonight. This was a photo taken by Ranger Ben Katzen over at the Forest Preserve District of Kane County. This was back when they were still at Tecawitha Woods. If any of you remember the garage that was there next to the McGuire house. Ben went out, I think he came in one morning and found this. Unfortunately, this raccoon didn't make it. There must have been something really tasty in that dumpster, but they're the kind of animal that can avail themselves of a lot of opportunities for food and shelter that we offer them, but they can also find themselves in some pretty devilish pickles. And that's what happened to that raccoon there. So lots of things kill these animals. We have lots of raccoons and lots of things kill them. So we end up with a lot of dead raccoons. Now, if we go back to Chris's photo and we zoom in, we see that there's a lot of flies on this carcass. These are bottle flies, also known as blowflies. And if we look here, we see that they are reproducing. Those are all the baby flies, also known as maggots. Now, there's a program I've always wanted to run and just never really had the opportunity to. This is an area that just fascinates me. It's the area of forensic entomology, where you can actually try to, and people, professional forensic entomologists are very, very good at this. They can almost pinpoint the time or the date of a death based on the insects that are drawn to the remains. Basically, you can divide a carcass into stages of how long it has been dead. It could be fresh, it could be bloated, there could be active decay, advanced decay, or you could be looking at just scattered remains. These bottle flies or blowflies, they tend to show up when the carcass is in a state of active decay. And the two, check out these scientific names. The species names Vicina and Vomitoria. They're told, you can tell them apart by some differences in their jaws. I'm not even going to claim to be able to go there, but in this area, we have both species, and Vicina is actually able to show up. They're a little bit more cold tolerant, so they can go to work on a carcass earlier in the season than C. vomitoria can. But it's just a neat sort of a thing. Chris and Carla, again, I appreciate you sending these photos because it gave me just a little glimpse into this fascinating world. And maybe someday we'll be able to do a forensic entomology program like I've always dreamed about. But for now, we'll just satisfy ourselves with these pictures, and keeping in mind that if you see something large and dead and decomposing, chances are very, very good that you're looking at raccoon in one of these stages of decomposition. So now let's go on to something a little more pleasant, a little bit prettier. Let's talk about a cactus that grows in Illinois. Now, I've heard about cacti in Illinois ever since I was a little girl. I said many times, my mom grew up downstate, down here in Menard County, and growing up on a Depression era farm. The kids didn't wear shoes in the summertime. They had two pastures where they let their cow graze. One didn't have cactus and the other one did. And my mom and her brother and her sister would always kind of fight over whose turn it was to get the cow in when it was out there in the pasture with the cactus growing. But it's something that seems a little incongruous because we're not in a desert, but we look at all the counties that have prickly pear cactus growing in them. Here in King County, there is a site not too far from here where it grows. In fact, here, I think this is a video. Nature Nerds and I went and explored there a couple of weeks ago. And lo and behold, peeking out of the grasses in a former gravel quarry area is the Opuntia cactus. I had tech support with me, tech support puppy was with me that day too, and kept waiting for him to show some sort of reaction to the spines on the cactus, but this dog eats bees too, so he seemed pretty impervious to it. There was some signs. These were cactus that were left. That's what happens to a cactus when a burn goes through. That was from, I think 2 years ago was the last time that area was burned, maybe 3 now. I remember walking out there shortly after a burn. There's a lot of white cedar that's growing in there. I'm sorry, no, red cedar that's growing in there that I think they're trying to control through burning. And it looked kind of like this bizarre moonscape with these shriveled up cacti and these rusty brown dead cedar bushes blooming or sort of withering there. But this is an area that is described quite eloquently in, well, Dick Young, you know, he describes flowers in his book, King County Wild plants in natural areas. He speaks from the heart. And I can only imagine what happened to have him say that he describes it as having a smooth skin and numerous wart-like extrusions holding tufts of hair-like thorns that are painfully difficult to extract. So I don't know if Mr. Young ran into these by accident and had to painfully extract some of those spines or not, but he actually lists 2 different species there. But he says that there's a puzzling find of the spiny prickly pear. And he gives them, if you're familiar with Dick Young's book, or actually if you're not familiar with Dick Young's book, there's a sort of a rating or classification system that shows you how conservative a plant is, which means how likely it is to grow or unlikely it is to grow in an area. The higher the number, the more conservative the plant. Prickly pear, he rated it a 5, and the spiny prickly pear is given a rating of 10. Both the species reside in a gravelly mined over area. You'll notice that he uses the term Black Hawk, the name Black Hawk for this preserve. Some of you might know this preserve today as the John Dewar Forest Preserve up on Route 31. I mentioned Dick Young's book. If you're not familiar with it, it's actually now in its 3rd edition. And I did check, Creek Bend Nature Center has a couple of copies remaining. This is a nice book to have just to see what is considered usual for this area. The majority of the book is basically a record of the plants. It's organized by color and by type of plant. There's trees, there's vines, there's aquatic plants, and then there's all the different iterations of our flowering plants, classified by the way they grow and then the color in which they grow. So it's a handy reference if you don't have one or you're not familiar with it. Give our friends at Creek Bend a call, because like I said, there's still a few copies remaining. I don't know if they will have another printing. I think you can also find these in used bookstores as well, but it's a handy reference if you're here in Kane County and you just want to know what's usual for the area. I've got copies of these all over the place because I never know what's usual around here. One plant that's not in there though is this plant, Butterweed. Pacera is the genus name. And John Dewar, I have to thank you for pointing this flower out. It's the sort of thing that I've probably walked by a million times and just never really paid attention to it. And then once John pointed it out to me, I see it all over the place. I've had a few of you write to tell me that you've been pulling it because it seems like it's very aggressive. It is listed on the Illinois Wildflowers website. It is considered a native plant, but it is also considered to be invasive. Sometimes a plant can be native to an area, but because of its aggressive growth habits, it can also invade an area and kind of take over. When John Dewar first told me about this plant, he said that he remembered seeing it down in the Springfield area when his job required him to go down to the center of our state's government. And then over time, it's kind of marched its way north. And this is the distribution map, again, from Illinois Wildflowers .info. And you'll see that Kane County has not had a sighting recorded, so maybe we need to let them know that we are seeing the plant here now as well. But it is a pretty plant, and it does host a number of native pollinators. It's got a really thick, kind of fleshy stem to it, and it's got a rayed flower. There's a mustard that's growing right now, a yellow rocket that has a similar, really vibrant yellow color. That too is also a very invasive plant. but there are some differences between the two. Look for yellow butterweed. If you haven't noticed it around, see if you can find it. Like you said, it's something that once, it's just like when you go out and you look for mushrooms and you don't see any, and you don't see any, and then finally you see one, and then suddenly you start to see them everywhere. Kind of the same with butterweed. Anyway, just something that's blooming right now, and it's very eye-catching and a little bit invasive. Now, this is another thing that's going on. I know it's a bane of our maintenance staff that has to keep our picnic shelters in order, but I think these bees are just so fascinating. This is the picnic shelter over at Delnor Woods. I was over there yesterday with a group of kids, and we weren't even anywhere near the picnic shelter, and I heard the cry, there's bees. Kids, some kids are just really, I guess they've been stung before. They're very, very wary of going anywhere where there's bees. But if we watch this video again, you'll see that there's sort of a patrol going on here. There's bees, here he goes to the side there. When you see carpenter bees that are hovering outside of these holes and they're not actually entering them, those are the male bees, and they're guarding their territories. And then there's the holes, there's the bees that disappear inside. Those are the females. If we look at a male carpenter bee, like this fellow over here on the right, you'll see he's got a bright yellow square on the front of his face. They sometimes will call that a bald face, but of course we've also got the bald face hornet, which has a big white square on its face and is a completely different insect. But some people will look at these bees, and they do nectar at a lot of our local flowers, and they look like a lot like a bumblebee. They're husky, and they've got a little bit of yellow fur on them. But look at this bare abdomen. They might have a few sparse little bits of hair back here, but generally their abdomen is dark and shiny. And most of our bumbles will have a little bit of yellow. The Bee Spotter website run through the University of Illinois is very helpful. They've got diagrams showing what bumbles look like, and then what the markings on the carpenter bee. So if you'd like some more information, check that out, Bee Spotter at the University of Illinois. But these guys are very, very busy right now. They are viewed as destructive. In fact, if you just look up Eastern carpenter bee, probably the first few things that come up are going to be all descriptions from pest removal and pest control companies. A lot of times people don't like to see animals that are chewing holes in their property, but I've seen them, in our, like I say, in our picnic shelters. They can, over a number of years, those galleries, because it's not just a hole. What's happening here is the female is going into the wood, and then there's a gallery inside there where she will lay her eggs and raise the brood inside there. And over time, it can cause some structural damage, but it takes years and years and years. Usually the wood itself starts to weather out before the carpenter bees will destroy it. So I've always tried to advocate for moderation. Don't just go spraying everything right away. They're a fascinating bee to have around, and they do their share of pollinating too, and they are native. So keep that in mind too, as you watch these bees go about their business. Now, I also found this over at Delnor Woods. We are seeing a fair amount of activity with our local ant populations, and we showed, was that just last week when we were watching the pavement ants having the duel back and forth? Well, this ant, this was a carpenter ant, and I don't know what happened. It was laying on the sidewalk. I don't think it was poisoned or anything. I think maybe this is just one from a large group that didn't necessarily make it. But this is what happens. This is how ants spread themselves around. You've maybe heard the term flying ants. Well, this is how new ant colonies get started. They raise a generation of winged adults. The males and the females will mate, and then the female will go ahead and start a new colony. This was a pretty good sized ant. And they, again, carpenter ants, not necessarily something you want to have in your home, but they are a very important part of the decomposer scene in our woods. We've got trees that have fallen or trees that are in various states of decay. Carpenter ants, just like carpenter bees, they don't actually eat the wood, but they do, they have the ability to chew through it, and that does then aid in the decomposition process. So in the woods where there's dead wood that needs to be decomposed is a perfect spot for these carpenter ants to be. I wish them well, and I wish that hopefully that they will not be headed towards any houses anywhere in the area. Now, this was a video. We've talked every week about what's moving through the area, and Clarice Dillard out in Sugar Grove sent this video. We're all, I think, familiar with the rose-breasted grosbeak male. If we're not, that's him there on the left. They're a black and white bird with this really bright patch of red on the breast. Very recognizable and a very welcome sign that spring migration is in full swing. But look what's there on the right. He's got a mate with him, or actually could just be coincidental that there's a male and a female at the feeder at the same time. But you can see the female grosbeak is quite different from the male. Got that gross beak. Turn the sound down here. She's got that large seed-eating bill, little white light stripe above the eye, and she's got a wing bar over here. Let's watch again, watch them feed. But just like with the red-winged blackbird, the female doesn't get nearly as much recognition as the male because of her much less obvious and more cryptic coloration. I thought this was a great video showing the difference between the genders in this wonderfully colorful male species of the species versus the female here. Watch her one more time. There are some grosbeaks that nest in the area, but a lot of them are on their way farther north, where they will spend the breeding months. Now, okay, we've looked at pretty things now for several slides. Let's go back to something kind of grungy. I had occasion this week to photograph both a male and a female wood tick. And I know we talked about ticks a few weeks ago, but some of you had some questions about how it is that we tell the difference. Not that it really matters, because ticks are not like mosquitoes. Mosquitoes, it's only the female that needs a blood meal. The male does not. And male mosquitoes feed on nectar. But with our ticks, they both need blood meals in order to advance from stage to stage. These are both adult. This is the American dog tick. Some people call it the wood tick. On the left here, we have the male, and he has what we call suspenders. You can see here, he's got these kind of like these stripes here that go along the sides of his body. And then here on the right, we have the female. They both, I always think she looks like a watermelon seed with a little collar, but we call this marking on her necklace. So if you can, and I know it's probably old fashioned and it's probably a little sexist, but if you think of it that the males wear suspenders and the females wear necklaces, you will never ever be confused again about whether you have a male or female tick that's trying to feed on your blood. Now, one last little tick shot here. I just thought this was kind of funny. I took this picture, not even realizing that my dog, this is Joey. He's got the one with the ears that stand up, and he looked like Batman looking at my tick with me. So again, that's the male dog tick. and that's my male dog, Joey. And on that particular day anyway, it was Batman. So next week, I'm going to talk a little bit about another local owl species, one that seems to also be increasing in numbers in this area, especially the barred owl. I had a chance encounter with them just not too long ago. We're going to go on a little field trip to another county. We're going to go down to Kendall County, and we're going to visit Richard Young Forest Preserve down there. I had occasion to visit there, saw all kinds of cool things that we don't, some things that we don't have growing here in Keene County that might be worth a trip down to see. Got some reader emails, got lots more. With that, I'm going to stop the share and turn it over to you. See, we've got looks like we got a couple of comments here. Where did barn owls live before barns? They were cavity and also like shelf nesters, like areas that had cliffs. Good question, Greg and Kelly. Shelf, areas where there were bluffs. They would find sheltered shelf areas, and then also cavities, snags, that sort of thing. The barn owl nests, there's a lot of cool pictures. I didn't include any of them. I thought having carcasses was probably going to be enough of a gross factor this week. We didn't have to show some barn owl nests, but nesting in whether they're in a barn owl box or on say an old bale of hay in a barn, they don't really build a nest at all, but they when they cough up their pellets, they just sort of leave them in the nest, and it makes over time a kind of a squishy, cushy sort of a substrate for the youngsters to grow up on. So a pile of pile of pellets in a barn owl nest is how they, the little ones, I guess it's like their barn owl playpen. But yeah, it's a good question. But I sort of wonder if barn owls are kind of like our chimney swifts, where the chimney swifts were cavity nesters. They tended to go inside hollow trees, and I'm sure there are more hollow trees, before the settlers arrived than we have around today. But once the settlers came and started building chimneys, the chimney swifts were like, oh my gosh, where have these things been all our lives? Let's migrate and let's start living in these solid brick structures. I think there was kind of a similar thing that happened with barn owls, where the population might have increased once settlers arrived and started building barns. So animals, they will adapt and take advantage of things that we offer them. Let's see, Wallace, you said that you were away for the weekend and were afraid that your birds would fly off. And you had male and female grosbeaks, and the rufous-sided towhee, Orioles, tanager, wow, and the male red-headed woodpecker. So he's still there, huh? That's well, and remember, the male and the female, the red-headed woodpeckers, the male and the female look the same. So if you're seeing just one, it could be either one. But if you're seeing two, you've probably got one of each. Huh?
I've only seen one at a time, so I don't know. I'm just so excited because usually it's like 1 day, 2 days, but this has been probably over a week.
Yeah, well, let's hope, Wallace, that they're finding what they want, and maybe you're only seeing one at a time because they're working on a nest somewhere. That'd be awesome.
Yeah,
keep us informed on that, will you? Because they
will. Yeah, I saw a juvenile last fall at my mom's feeder, who's like 4 houses up the road, or this past fall. Okay. So that makes me think they're near.
Yeah. Well, let's hope so.
Yeah.
That's great. All right, well, thanks for that update. And then, Meg, you've got a barred owl by you. The owlet is almost, or could already be gone from the nest. The barred owls that we'll talk about next week, I saw one up at Tecca with the Woods last week, and kind of wondered if it was maybe male of a pair with a nest nearby, but that's good to know that they're that far along with their breeding as well. They're just a really neat bird, and we might even practice our barred owl calls in the meantime. And well, you can always mute me if that's we get to that. Laura, you want to know about prickly pear in our winter time, and then John answered the question. Building up sugar in the cells to survive the winter. I think those kind of rough looking cacti that I had that one picture of, I think that was more due to the burn that had occurred there. There's actually some, if you want to get a for sure look at prickly pear cactus, you can certainly go up to John Dewar Forest Preserve and go down to the area where the quarry was, across the trolley museum tracks that are back there, and you can poke around. It's kind of like an Easter egg hunt, except it's prickly, but you can look for them there, or you can go to the native plant garden behind Potawatomi Community Center, and you can enter the garden through the community center. You can go out on the veranda, which last time I was there, there was a female mallard sitting on eggs in a planter on the veranda. So you can check on her, see if she's still there, and then make your way down the stairs. As soon as you go down the stairs to the garden, there's a stand of prickly pear. It would be on your right or to the west by the railing of the stairs going down to the garden. So you can check those out there as well. I know a couple of times people have harvested some of the fruits that develop on those cacti, and they're supposed to be quite tasty. So you can certainly check them out there. Like Joan Kramer has even been nice enough in her gardening efforts there to put a sign that says prickly pear cactus. So if you're not sure you're looking at them, the sign will definitely confirm that that's what you found. Laura, you had asked another question via text earlier about having a robin coming to your suet. And I thought that was kind of interesting, given that we are in the full on spring now. We're past the middle of May. So you'd think that robins wouldn't have need for suet, but it's been super dry, and it's also been chilly, and both of those things will depress the number of insects that are moving around. And I think your neighborhood robin is really, really grateful that you've got some suet there for it. And maybe you'll have a batch or a whole brood of robins that are going to be suet dependent. We'll have to wait and see. But I think maybe the weather conditions are having our birds deviate from what their norm would be, just because of our extreme dryness and then the cooler temperatures that we've been having. Oh, does anybody else have anything they'd like to share tonight? Any other cool stuff, pretty stuff, dead stuff? If not, I really, really appreciate you tuning in tonight. I'm going to do some more experiments with broadcasting from the porch out here to see if there's a way maybe I could block them, because it was so nice to have the rain pattering in the background. Maybe we'll try that again sometime this summer. But anyway, much appreciate your time this evening, and I hope to see you back next week. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Pam. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Great.
Thanks, Pam.
Thanks, Pam.
Yes.
Good job.